This is the narrated PowerPoint for Chapter 2, Socialization Through Writers and Genres, in Dorothy Windsor's Writing Like an Engineer. So you can see here from these two quotes, what we're beginning to see in this chapter is how writing is introducing these students to the engineering profession. Through different types of reports they'll be required to write. And they're becoming a member of the engineering discourse community. And so this chapter emphasizes the value of this type of study, that when a student makes the transition from the classroom into the workplace, it's very, very different. There's a lot more at stake. The student has been studying for 4, or in most cases more, years, and now is trying to actually become what they've been studying. And so there's a lot on the line, certainly emotionally and all that sort of thing. And also money, think of it that way. But it's problematic because, it says, as it says with the first point, these genuine situations are always more subtle and complicated than any writing could anticipate. There's another well-known writer who's done a lot of study of writing in the workplace named Cesar Ornatowski, who points out that what happens with the type of writing you do in the workplace, it's always political. And by political, he doesn't mean, conservative versus liberal or Republican versus Democrat, but just he's talking about workplace politics and how you fit into that hierarchy, and how learning these reports brings you in at the bottom of the hierarchy, but certainly, and also learning them enables you, it provides a path for you to make your way up the corporate ladder. And certainly the motivation of the writer at work and that in the classroom differ a great deal. The student is just trying to get a grade, and the writer at work is trying to learn how to become an engineer or a business person, an accountant or a salesperson or a technical communicator, for that matter. It works that way for all of us. The writing in the work at work draws together a variety of elements into a coherent practice. So, for example, the accountant has to take principles of accounting and apply them, and then be able to write about them so that people can have an understanding of what they've been doing and how well they understand it. And the same is true certainly for engineering, for where the engineer might be eager to design, but then they have to also be able to document what they've done so that their supervisors can have an understanding of it. And this is especially important in terms of figuring out who is going to successfully make that transition from student to engineer, and also who has a better chance of being able to go on and become a practicing engineer someday. And it also accounts for design practices. Part of creating documents in different genres, which we're going to get into that term genre in just a minute, involves being able to design a document in a particular way. And that's why in service courses, especially for engineers, the introductory technical communication courses, professors are real big on design, about having students write documents in different ways, as a letter, as a memo, as a long formal report. Now, this term genre, I mean, there's a couple of different ways to look at it. And one is that in that first bullet point, she uses that phrase, imitation of models. And this is something that you see, again, talking about other disciplines. If you have if you know anyone who is an art major, or if any of you are art majors, you may take a class where you're asked to imitate a master. You're told to go and find a painting that you really like and to imitate it in some fashion. Perhaps try to draw it exactly as the master did it. You might take one of Van Gogh's works, for example, and try to paint it exactly as Van Gogh did. Or you may use the style and technique as something that would guide how you do your own painting, but on a completely different subject matter. So it works in a lot of different ways. Traditionally, it was the art student trying to replicate exactly what the master artist had created. So, and in English language studies, we see that as well, especially in the first year composition classroom, where often you have to buy a reader, and in this case, we have essays or perhaps excerpts from writers, some of whom are part of what we refer to as the literary canon, and others are perhaps more contemporary. But we ask students to imitate those to some degree. And then another way that we look at that in terms of writing is saying, well, these are different types of essays. This is a descriptive essay. This is a comparison contrast essay. This is a persuasive essay. This is an argumentative essay. And we might say the difference between the persuasive essay and the argumentative essay is that the persuasive essay is trying to change behavior, and the argumentative essay just exists for the sake of creating an argument on a particular topic. It's not so much interested in changing behavior as existing as an argument for its own sake. And so those are genres, okay? But the more recent interpretation of genre has been the second part of the second bulletin, is that a genre is a social action, a typified response to a recurring situation. And perhaps the best example of that in terms of writing is proposal writing. If you take a course in proposal writing, and I taught one recently, we have proposal writing courses at the undergraduate and graduate level in the Department of Writing and Linguistics. Anyway, if you take a proposal writing course, you're going to learn addiction. You're going to learn all types of different words and jargon terms that people in the proposal writing field are familiar with. And then you're also going to learn about different ways of writing the documents, and a lot of times they will give you funding organizations will give you an outline that they want you to follow. But sometimes they don't. And in that case, what you have to do is you have to create something that is similar to how proposals are written, and we study that as well. But these proposals are a good example of part of what attracts me to technical communication as a field of study, and that is, and this is true to some degree of most, if not all, technical communication, these are documents that do things. There might be instructions that show you how to put things together, or there might be proposals that secure funding for an after-school program that then helps lots of young people to succeed in school, to provide them with support they would not otherwise have had. It enables people to go on to college and have professions as well that they otherwise may not have had access to. And this is all kind of summed up by that final bullet point. And these genres are created by discourse communities. The ones that Windsor are going to study are the test report and the progress report. And an issue that she's dealing with is the idea that data is sacred. There's an attitude in engineering that, there is writing that you do that is rhetorical. If you really push engineers, you can say, don't you write proposals? Well, yeah, we write proposals. But they also will very often claim that data is sacred. Data is just, these are facts, and they're unchangeable. And of course, that's not really true either. There's plenty of ideas about data that weren't being interpreted correctly, that we then reinterpreted, and then we're able to arrive at new knowledge about different scenarios. And so what that bullet point under test report actually means, that's not something that's really true. It's an attitude that's prevalent in engineering. And then we also have look at the progress report, and the progress report, that itself is an expression of engineering ethos. That is, with the character of the engineer. And a reference that they made there, Windsor mentioned that the engineers that were able to use the progress report as a way of evaluating their own work, typically their work was regarded more highly. I wrote a paper when I was in my PhD program, and it was an empirical study that I did. It was I've mentioned it before. It's the psychological sense of community study that I did, and when I got to the end of it, I had done a study. I had evaluated 4 different classes, 2 that I was teaching and another one of my fellow graduate students was teaching. And I saw that there were changes, there were flaws in the way that I did it, and so I wrote an evaluative section to my paper that I then handed in. And when I saw the professor next, she said, "Oh, I enjoyed reading your paper." I said, "Oh, and I graded it for you too." She said, "Yeah, I had some more suggestions, but yeah, you pointed out a lot of problems with the study." And that's good. That's a good thing to do, to realize that you're conscious of errors that you might have made or ways that you would change a study like that. So, but in a sense, that's kind of a progress report. And at the time, I was thinking about possibly following through on that project as a dissertation study. I wound up doing something else, but anyway, yeah, so very similar type of situation. Questions? See you online.